The United States of America has officially begun the blockade of the Hormuz Strait, and Donald Trump has threatened to destroy any ships that approach the U.S. Navy forces participating in the blockade. At the same time, Trump stated that the Iranians called him today and begged to make a deal that they couldn't reach on Saturday in Pakistan. The Wall Street Journal reports that Trump is considering resuming strikes on Iran in addition to the blockade of the Hormuz Strait. At the same time, there are reports that the US and Iran are still continuing negotiations, and Iran has started signaling its readiness to give up its nuclear stockpiles. And now experts have stated that a successful blockade could force Iran to make concessions in order to end hostilities and open the Hormuz Strait for everyone. And even opponents of the war and Trump seem to support this idea. My name is Alexei Peachy. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave any comment under this episode and give it a like. And also subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, the American military announced today that on Monday they began a blockade of the ports and the entire coastline. After the recent negotiations in the capital of Pakistan, the talks did not bring any results. The blockade applies to all ships, regardless of their flag, that try to enter or leave Iranian ports in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz with destinations or departures outside of Iran, according to the American military, will be allowed to pass. No peaceful agreement was reached. US President Donald Trump announced a naval blockade and clarified that the US Navy will detain in international waters all ships that have paid a fee to Iran. Quote, "None of those who pay the illegal fee will be able to safely travel by sea. Any Iranian who shoots at us or at a civilian vessel will be blown to hell." The US Navy will also begin clearing the Strait of Hormuz, mines. Later, Trump issued a new threat against Iran, stating that the US would sink any Iranian vessels that approach the US blockade of Iranian ports. Trump stated that although the Iranian fleet was, let me remind you, completely destroyed, the US did not sink, quote, their fast attack boats. And here is Trump's statement verbatim. "Warning, if any of these boats approach our blockade, it will be immediately destroyed using the same destruction system we use against drug traffickers on boats at sea. It's fast and brutal." In response, the acting Iranian defense minister stated on Monday that the country is ready for any scenario and warned that any aggression against it will result in a harsh and decisive response. After that, Donald Trump stated that this morning his administration allegedly received a call from Tehran, and on the call they were begging Donald Trump to make a deal with him. Trump insisted that the main stumbling block in negotiations with Tehran is the nuclear issue, adding that Iran will not have nuclear weapons. Quote, "We agreed on many things, but they didn't agree to this, and I think they will agree. I'm almost sure of it. In fact, I'm sure of it. If they don't agree, there will be no deal. There will never be a deal." That's a quote. He stated that another priority for the United States is the return of enriched uranium still in Iran's possession. And against this backdrop, the Wall Street Journal writes that Trump is considering the possibility of resuming limited strikes on Iran in addition to blockading the Strait of Hormuz. According to sources, this is one of the scenarios being discussed in the White House after the US-Iran talks in Islamabad on April 11 ended unsuccessfully. Another option is the resumption of full-scale strikes on Iran. However, as sources noted, this scenario is less likely due to the risk of further destabilizing the Middle East and Trump's reluctance to prolong the military conflict. In addition, according to the Wall Street Journal, during the blockade of the Hormuz Strait, which Trump announced the day before, the US plans to put pressure on its allies to take responsibility for security. And here, Donald Trump wants to make a very clever move. The point is that if there is no deal in the near future, Donald Trump wants to involve the allies in the blockade of the Hormuz Strait and then gradually shift this responsibility onto them. Like, well, you've already brought your ships here, and then gradually withdraw American ships from the region and at some point say, well, listen, this isn't our responsibility anymore. The allies are already there. Let the allies handle it. But the main question is, what's the logic behind this blockade? A successful blockade could force Iran to make concessions in order to stop the fighting and open the Hormuz Strait for everyone. But until a solution is found, the blockade will also remove millions of barrels of oil from the market, which will inevitably lead to higher oil prices for all participants in the global market. Today, Brent crude oil futures have once again exceeded the $100 per barrel mark. Once again, that's a 7% price increase in just one day. Overall, since the beginning of the war, the strait has been selectively closed and Iran itself decides who will be allowed to pass through it. As a rule, these are vessels transporting oil and gas to China, Turkey, Pakistan, and India. And this kind of selective closure of the strait has become one of the most damaging consequences of the war to date. And up until the last moment, the White House did not try to stop this flow, arguing that stopping it would lead to a further increase in prices. The point is that the Americans turned a blind eye to the fact that Iran was actively selling its oil and, as you know, even lifted sanctions on Iranian oil. Political experts and former officials believe that this was a mistake, similar to the one the United States made by not imposing a full embargo on Russian oil after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And here is the most important thing. Oil and gas exports make up about 15% of Iran's GDP. And reducing this figure to zero will inevitably lead to the collapse of the country's economy, and this will push the Ayatollah regime toward destruction. That's why this will definitely force the mullahs to sit down at the negotiating table. So now the US will intercept ships passing through Iranian ports and coastal areas, stop the vessels, and either force them to turn back or seize them. Just like American forces did with Venezuelan ships earlier this year. And this will lead to a complete halt of Iranian exports. On the other hand, you have to understand that this is like two sides of the same coin. On the other hand, this blockade leads to a situation that experts call open for everyone or closed for everyone. In other words, it's either one way or the other. The thing is, Iran will be able to withstand difficulties in the short term. Meanwhile, the whole world will have to face even higher prices. So, while we wait for the collapse of the Iranian regime, all of us will have to pay for it with real price increases on absolutely everything. And here's the trap. Iranians are quite satisfied with all this. It only prolongs the squeeze on the global economy. And instead of forcing Iran to follow the rules, this blockade may actually intensify the escalation without exerting any significant short-term economic pressure on Iran. This is clearly a long game, and the question is, who will blink first? Once again, in the short term, Iran can survive without exporting oil and gas. The question is, how long will their margin of safety last? Finally, I'll share a terrifying thought. By blockading the Strait of Hormuz, Trump is now fighting to return to the status quo that existed before the start of this war. In other words, Donald Trump has led to a situation where the main goal of this war is simply to return to what existed before it began. So why all of this? I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you consider the work of this channel important, interesting, and necessary, I encourage you to support the channel financially. With your donation or a paid subscription, how can you do this? All the links and details are in the description of this video. It says there, support Alexei Pechi's channel. Choose any option that is convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support you provide. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.